Welcome to another session of We Connect, where we explore the ideas, companies, and key players that continue to raise the bar in Ediscovery.
Today, we're going to be talking about Ediscovery boot camps, and this is a series that Ian and I are putting together. And our first boot camp exercise is workflows. And I mentioned Ian Campbell. I'm joined today with Ian Campbell. He's the CEO of iConnect. Ian, introduce yourself real quick and tell us why, or really tell us how long you've been in the business. That would be the most interesting to me.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the opportunity today, Gavin. It's Ian Campbell, CEO of iConnect. I've been doing this since around, 96-ish. Originally started out as a concordance trainer, and from there moved over to be a concordance master distributor for their platform, and then kind of invented a web front end for concordance way back in the day, and that migrated, of course, now to SQL and now to the iConnect system that we're going to be showing you part of today. I think, though, just to sort of recap, one of the key things we find is it's all well and good to have a tool, but if you know how to use the tool, then it's that much more powerful. And I think some of the nuggets we're going to show today are going to, as the seminar topic said, amplify what you're already doing. I think a lot of the people on here are already seasoned Ediscovery professionals, and what we can hopefully do is raise the bar and on what you do every single day.
Yeah, I looked back, Ian, at our history, and we obviously used iConnect in the old platform for the BP oil spill case way back 2010, 2011. And I looked back at our first contract, and our anniversary, our 11-year anniversary comes back in June. So it looks like we joined the fray in 2011, and then we're one of the first onboarders to the new platform back in 2014. So it's been a fun ride, and I think the product has moved in amazing ways. You've done a really good job. But today we're going to talk about, kind of in the nutshell, if you've got a product, you've got a tool, you've got a platform, now what? How do you wrap workflows around that? And what are the key considerations or the takeaways that you need for that? But first, to kind of level set where we're going to talk about today, we all know at the EDRM, we've seen it 1,000 times. In a few weeks, we're going to be doing a webinar with Craig Ball, and we're going to kind of rework the EDRM a little bit into a little bit more reality there. But today, we're going to talk about a few sections of the EDRM. We're going to talk about review. Ian's going to give us a quick overview of that, and we're going to always be talking about review because that's the main thing we're supporting. We're also going to visit about collection, which is one of our key topics we're going to mention today about collection. We'll touch on processing and how that kind of fits in, and then we'll spend a good amount of time on production workflows. But I have a new bullet for the EDRM, which is planning, practice, and templates. And that's kind of where all this stuff is well and good, but how do you piece it all together so that you aren't trying to figure out what these things necessarily are right out of the box? So how do you practice in advance? How do you plan? Today I got an email and a call from one of my good LSP buddies, and she said, "Hey, I need to practice. Can you give me an account on the Avansic Now system?" I said, "Yeah, no problem. Here you go." And she said, "Great, now I can load data and everything." We've even had people contact us that are working on the SED certification say, "Hey, I need a tool to practice this, and can you give me access?" "Yeah, no problem. Here's some free access. Go give that a shot, and you can play with the workflows that's kind of been developed upon that platform." But first, I want Ian to kind of go through, since the whole goal here is to support document review and everything peripheral around that, as the chart said, review's kind of in the middle and all this stuff floats around it. Ian's going to talk us a little bit about, what is the common overview of document review? And for those of you that really haven't seen it a lot, here's how we put that together in one thing. So I'm going to hand this over to Ian. Ian, you ready for your screen to be shared? Do you want to talk first?
Yeah, no, that's all good. Just as you're doing that, Gavin, I'll mention that, on the EDRM, one of the metrics that people kind of forget to realize is that a RAND study was done a number of years ago, and it identified that 72% of the cost in a review or in a litigation is in review, which means that every minute, every hour that we can save you today with some of these kind of best practices hopefully is going to pay off tenfold from a timeline perspective, which in turn pays off, of course, from a cost perspective. Gavin, can you see my screen okay?
Yes, you look great.
Perfect. Okay, just having a look here, we're going to bounce through this, and although I'm going to show you the iConnect platform today, I want you to look at this in the context of pretty much any review platform. Some of the basics that are sort of components of the review process. We're going to show you a little bit about the production and templating and processing. But when it just comes to review, there's a few key things to keep in mind. Number one, security. These are, for the most part, confidential documents, or in some cases highly confidential documents, or even at the government level, secret or top secret documents that need to be locked down. And what we've done is gone and created a security layer. iConnect is in fact FedRAMP authorized. That may be a term that some of the audience today have heard, which means we've gone through a really extensive vetting process with the US federal government to make sure that the security in the platform is on par with what's required to hold sensitive government information. So that's in our standard platform. It's in the Avansic Now platform as well. Username, password, you can run multi-factor authentication. You can put things into your language of choice. So if in fact you've got clients coming in from overseas, we've actually now turned every button in the application into Japanese. So with one click, you can do that. Makes a fantastic focus for your clients, meaning they can come in their language of choice. Security, again, being a big thing, we have made this browser agnostic, which means whether you're running in Safari, AWS, Google Chrome, Edge, Microsoft Edge, totally open to whatever platform you want to run it in. When I log in, the system knows who I am. And this is where it becomes a little bit more intuitive. You know, people start to understand that my favorite projects have a star on them, and my administrative tasks are under the gear icon. And if I was to ask anybody on this call today, hey, where's your logout in Facebook or Twitter or Instagram? You go, oh, I click on my name and that's where it is. And sure enough, here you click on your name and that's where it is. So I think making sure that whatever tool you're using is very, very intuitive is key to success and key to making a workflow which is going to support the needs of your project. From a views perspective, the iConnect platform and other platforms as well, a lot of them kind of come in and show you a view that very much sort of looks like this. It's a big kind of Excel spreadsheet view, hundreds of rows of metadata. One of those probably contains the body text of the actual document itself. We've done something a little bit unique in iConnect in that beyond just looking at an Excel spreadsheet view of all of the information, you can in fact click a little thumbnail icon here and you can actually look at thumbnail views of every document in your collection. A great way to be able to come in, do a very quick search of, let's say, for the word knee, come back, find all the documents you're looking for, and immediately visually go, oh, there's a bunch of marketing documents. I know I can get rid of those really quickly, and I can drag them over into a folder panel here. The advantage as well, though, is that you have folders, but you or tags, some platforms call them. In iConnect, we've got folder panels, which can contain multiple folders within a folder panel. So you can have one for general, one for issues, one for coding, one for custodians. A great way to be able to go in and work with the data. Further to being able to see the documents as thumbnails, when I want to look at an individual document, I go into a built-in viewer. And again, similar to what you see within other applications, it's a viewer that then allows me to see, first of all, the word knee that I searched for, but second of all, things like this. You see it that the trabecular and femoral are already highlighted because I've actually got word marking turned on, which is giving me an instant visual cue of the information which is there. Just to kind of wrap things up a little bit, other things to look for in a platform, the ability to be able to have date selectors and drop downs, and the ability to have radio buttons and checkboxes, the ability to be able to track every activity by every user on that record. So if anybody ever says who marked that as confidential, you can actually go back and have a look at who actually did that. Further to that, in an administrative view, you could even go down to what IP address was that person at when they actually clicked that button. So again, lots and lots of ways to dig into the data and get the information that you need out of it. You can in fact go in and you can redact documents. Here's a document right here, already has a couple of things on it. If I want to go in and redact something here as confidential, I could in fact simply go in and draw a box on it. I'm simply letting go the box and it turns black, has the word confidential, it's in white, it's the right size, and I can actually QC it here by going into preview mode so I can actually see what's underneath each of these redactions. Finally, when I want to go produce or share these documents, it's very, very simple. I simply grab a bunch of documents I want to go look at here, I'll grab, in this case, I'll grab something out of my general area, maybe in my trial exhibits. And at that point in time, I can in fact go in and click a little share icon here, which allows me to share that bundle of documents with members of my team, experts, or co-counsel. So ultimately, as a bit of a wrap up, what you're going to see today is a way to optimize what you saw, but templatize it, create a workflow which really optimizes these things. But it really is simple. You log in, you choose the case you're working on, you look at your documents, you do things with your documents, and then you share them or produce them or report out on them in some fashion. So hopefully that gives you enough of a sort of a framework of what we're going to be looking at today, such that as you see Gavin do some of this stuff and some of the very cool optimizations you can do and templatizing and workflows and enhancements you can do with the pieces you see here in front of you, you'll fully understand what the power of a tool like this can be. That's it. Back over to you, Gavin.
Yes, and I mean, it's important to know that a lot of the tools in the modern tools do a lot of the same things. They have very similar issues, but there are some legacy tools out there that I still find clients still using. They just kind of haven't graduated out of. I won't name any of those, but I will say one of the more legacy ways out there is no tool, where you have like stuff on a file server and then you have an Excel document that's helping, or a spreadsheet that's helping you manage that. We really need to move into the world where we have access to some tool. I mean, a lot of those barriers, it's cost too much, I don't have IT, I don't have storage, those are all gone. The tools are dirt cheap right now. It's not like the old days where we used to charge a ton of money to do all kinds of crazy things. There's also, we'll talk about that later, different ways that people are selling this service. And I'm not suggesting you go jump in and use it, but even some of the big guys, Microsoft and everybody, have some basic review functionality built into a lot of their platforms. So Ian kind of gave us the overview, and there's a lot of things that really we need to be able to do, we need to understand how to do, or easily be able to figure out. But that's kind of the basic stuff. Let's get into what are the things that we need to be able to do at a ready moment's notice, or that have to be really intuitive. And one of those is the origination of a project. And more specifically, what I'm talking about is when you're starting a project, and most firms, in my experience, a set of litigators is really good at doing plaintiff's work, or a set of litigators is really good at doing defense work, specifically insurance defense or whatever it might be. But what we've seen over the last few years is where there were tools that were specifically really good for massive plaintiff dump work, for MDL work, and other tools that were better for accident reconstruction or something like that. We've seen that kind of come together to where a lot of these modern tools, it's one size fits all, yet the workflow slightly is modified based on where you are in that type of system. And so when we're thinking about how do we get that project started and what is the kickoff, I'm just going to show it to you real quick. One of the things that we want to say is, I've got some projects in my system already, I want to start a new one. In some places you can just click new project and you can type in the name of whatever you want your project to be. You can choose templates. In this case, I only have one template because my law firm, my fictitious law firm, Power Nelson, only does one type of work, or we might have MedMal or something like that. So having in advance, sitting down, which is taking time away from billing, and saying, okay, what type of projects do we have? Is this project that different from this type of project that we need to set up different coding panels like Ian showed you? And that was one of the reasons we showed you that stuff in advance, is here are the things that we can customize and say, this group likes it this way, this group likes it this way, but now we can have multiple ways to deal with that. And then also different ways of organizing the data. So I'm going to click create project. We'll come back and look at that here again in a second and kind of see how that worked out. And so when you're thinking about templatizing and having a plan in advance, what does that plan include? Does that plan include having production and collection guidelines? And I will tell you, those of you that understand how to use GoToWebinar, there are some handouts that I've put on the platform that you can download. We'll also email them to you later. I've given you our chain of custody form. It's an unbranded chain of custody form. It doesn't say Avansic anywhere on it, except for the address where you can delete it, because this is the one that you would use to send to us. And then we also are giving you our production requests standard document. And we'll talk more about that document in a few slides there. But having this stuff in advance and understanding what it means and practicing it, like that bullet says, is really key to what that means. And so if I go back to my project, it created a project and it's saying, great, you've got this. And sorry you didn't get to watch the paint dry, but I figured I wouldn't bore you. But this project is empty. And if I go into it, we'll see that there's no records in it. And it's actually going to yell at me in a second and say, hey, you've got no records. Are you sure you're doing something right? But it's already got all my coding tabs over here. It's got all my folders set up. I mean, there's nothing in this, but it's all set up where I've got my different views for different QC views. I've got my different iView views. There's a lot of things that are set up in advance because I sat down and thought about it. You know, Ian, when you guys sell a system out, I mean, are you pushing an ideal workflow? Are you letting people build it from their scratch? I mean, from scratch. I know your system is very powerful in that we can do whatever we want, but you know, are we in the business of telling people how to do it or letting them do it in their own way?
No, you know, it's a great comment, you know, and I think I think from that perspective, I mean, you can do it either way. We've got a bit of a box of Lego approach. It's sort of a, here's a box of Lego, but here's also a guideline if you want to make an airplane, or a guideline if you want to make a castle. And we give you templates to sort of create those. And I think that's the important thing, is that you might take an airplane and then go, yeah, but I want to put wheels on the bottom of it, or I want to put wheels on the top of it. You can start to modify the templates that we have very, very easily, and then save them as such. The other thing that's kind of under the hood that you're not seeing, because it's not really part of the user interface, is that the other templatized thing in the background is all of the user profiles. You see senior users, project managers, reviewers, experts with limited views. All of that can also be templatized. So beyond the field structure, folder structure, the kind of things that are very tactile to what we're seeing today, there's a lot of other security that can also be under the hood templatized, so that if you know I always want my experts to be able to do A, B, and C, you can have a user designated that as that, set that as a template, and when you set up a new project, you can bring in that template with it.
And when we're talking about practicing, you know, one of the things that I encourage my clients to do is practice things like this. You know, I'll give you as much basic work as you want. So I'll say, here's a very small production that you can look at. And I'm just using this as an example, and I'm going to drag and drop it up. And then and we'll talk a little bit more about this later. What this system does is actually going to process that DAT file and everything like that. And that's for another day. But it's going to give me this idea of a pre-scan that's going to tell me, here's what I expected. So did my opposing party that gave me this production tell me there were 55 columns and 82 rows? 82 rows means that I'm expecting 82 documents. So if my cover letter that came with the inbound production says, I'm sending you 90 documents, we immediately know, well, you're short 8, dude. Let's go back and talk about this. Maybe I want to load this, maybe I don't. And we're also talking about practicing. One of the things that I've seen clients struggle with is just this very simple understanding of what do these columns actually mean? You know, what do they look like? And here, our load file, we have a column that's not mapped. It says begin doc, and I can't find something that, you know, is like begin doc, because in my system, because my users understand beg doc, not begin doc. So in the middle there, that's what my template's called, but on the left, that's what the load file provided. And so in this case, when I sent my production request to the opposing party, I told them to label it beg doc, yet they labeled it begin doc for various reasons. And some of the people here on here, I'm already getting a chat in on some of them, giving me all the other words out there. When you get load files from opposing party, it's kind of like the Wild West, and having experience with looking at them and reviewing them. And some of these tools now are giving you this display. I mean, the old way we used to do this was we would open it in TextPad and then copy the little P document and paste it into a spreadsheet like Excel, and then bam, you can see the document. There's also some plugins you can get for Excel that let you open DAT files and look at them. But in this case, you know, we've got different ways we can go through and simply understand what the data is coming in a load file, and we can practice what our imports is necessarily going to look like. When I mentioned guidelines, you know, we talk about production request standards, and this document is pretty heavy. I'm going to maximize it. You know, we'll talk about the top in a minute, but at the bottom, I've got all the different metadata fields that I'm expecting the opposing party to give me. And now I have a workflow that lets me go and check and say, did they give me beg doc? They did. Did they give me end doc? They did. Because I can go and look at that against my, you know, my system right here and just kind of walk through them and say, what is missing or what's extra? And one of the nice things about, again, the iConnect platform does is it does it kind of for you automatically, because your template in the system matches your production request. And anytime I see a yellow, it's going to tell me, hey, they're giving you something you didn't ask for, or they didn't name it right. And so I can pretty quickly go through and say, okay, they've done a really good job, but then at the end, they didn't necessarily give me some of the things I really needed, like conversation index. We'll talk about that in a few weeks with Craig. That's one of the key elements for doing email threading and tracking and looking for missing emails. So when we're mentioning this concept of practicing, my biggest point there is understand what these concepts are so that you're not surprised the first time. Going to negotiate your production is wrong after you received it is not the right time to deal with. You got to do it in advance. The other thing that I'll mention, and this is true about most common providers, and this is really a hit on the legacy tools. Like you may still own a tool, and I won't say any of their names, and all of you know who I'm talking to. I see 3 of you on there right now. You're still using this really old desktop tool that has zero support. You can't call anybody and get any help. Now, you know everything about that tool, but having multiple levels of support is something that in project origination, you need to know. Hey, when I come across this type of problem, I know I can call Ian. Ian maybe doesn't do service calls, but I know I can call, Sid at iConnect and ask him, hey, I did this 4 months ago. Why can't I do this again? Or I know I can call some LSP. And so having that support layer in advance, but also in some cases, the tools have some integrated support in. And I'll just look at iConnect real quick. Here I'm on a page and I notice I don't have a little help button. But if I go to, say, a dashboard page, I'll get a help button that'll tell me where I am, what I'm doing, what the basic things are in that. And so how good is that built-in help? What's behind that? And understanding that in advance of starting your project is one of the things that I'm really trying to talk about there. And Ian, anything more about project origination that comes to mind?
No, I think it's interesting. Way back in the early days, one of the questions we got was how do all the documents get in there? And that's when, you and I were suing each other, Gavin, and you had a box of paper and I had a box of paper. And that morphed kind of mid-2000s to you had a box of hard drives and backup tapes, and I had a box of hard drives and backup tapes. And that's gone one step even further now, where the data is everywhere. And I think we're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. But ultimately, that whole question of how does it get in there has resurfaced again, because now I've got some crazy data points I need to get in there. Slack and Yammer and legacy files off an old system. And there's lots of different ways to get the data in. I think what you were showing there is if you get a relatively clean DAT file with pre-parsed data and metadata sitting in it, but also, the concept of sort of dragging and dropping up a native is phenomenal. And that's the one area of our platform that people really, really like. They can literally go, oh, look, I've got a PST and I'm on the other side of the world. I'm just going to drag it over here. Magic happens and I've got documents in my database. So I think that kind of a simplicity can really, really make a difference in and around that question of how does the data get in there.
Yeah, that's true. If it's so simple, why do I need to practice? You're ruining my topic there, Ian, but it's great. So,
Okay.
When we talk about how to request and load data, the other topic, one of the topics I want to talk about is getting data from your clients. And there's really not a lot of demo here. This is I would call this common sense and documentation. If you're a project manager, or if you've done SEDS training, or if you're just very, very detail oriented. And at Avansic, we have, I know who exactly I'm talking about. I have 2 really good people. They're both extremely detail oriented on chain of custodies and documentation. They know where everything is in the entire office at any given time. And that really helps us with collection. And so when you're thinking about how to get data from your custodians or your clients, there's some sources out there and some things you need to deal with. And this is kind of almost leaning into left side of the EDRM, where we're talking about the red identification box. But my opinion is collection is the best form of preservation. Preservation should be used when you have an ongoing issue where you're still creating documents that are relevant. And collection is the best way to preserve the data because you got it locked in stone. So get a wider swath of custodians and you think, go collect that data, set it aside, and let everybody keep doing their jobs. But along with that is custodial interviews, asking the custodian, where do you store the data? You don't want to get surprised later when they say, oh yeah, we use Slack, we don't use Teams. Wait, we collected Teams, but we didn't use Slack. And guess what? You're going to learn that if you haven't asked the custodian those questions, you're going to learn that during their deposition, and then you're going to be backpedaling all the way out. A lot of people just go straight to IT and say, IT, where's all the stuff? And that's a good start or a good end piece. I prefer to start with the custodians, ask them where they store everything. Go ask IT, is this what they're telling the truth? They say yes, great. Or they say no, they also have this. You go back to the custodian and say, IT said this, and you're learning all these things in advance. And that's another form I guess I could have given you today, which is it's our custodial interview form. So if you send me an email, I'll make sure we get that out for you. It's a very generic document that kind of goes through, here's the type of things you should ask your custodian. That is an evolving document, meaning that last year's document didn't contemplate some of the crazy stuff that we've seen today with, this nearline encryption that's out there. So there are those traditional sources. Go ahead, Ian.
I'm just going to mention that as well, that, and I think sometimes that's positioned as an adversarial process. You're asking people, hey, where's your stuff? We need your stuff. And I think for the most part, people will be very cooperative because they realize that as a bit of a team player, their information is the information that the company needs in order to either make a claim or defend a claim. And I think it's something to keep in mind that shouldn't be, and I don't think is an adversarial process. It's something where you're asking people to kind of help us understand where this information is, help us understand where the nuggets of information might be, so that we collectively can either prosecute or defend some form of claim. And I think for the most part, when you're having those conversations, having it in such a way that it's not adversarial, I think is key to the success of making sure you've got all those nuggets.
Yeah, and it's a fun process when you go through it. There's people that are really good at this, and I will say most of them are not lawyers. No offense to the legal team out there, but there's a really strong set of paralegal groups. There's some pretty strong people that, even at our company, that can work with it. But you're trying to go through and figure out what's going on. And my last point here is, when a custodian makes up a word that I don't know or says something that I don't know, I always ask them, explain it to me like I'm your grandparent, not your kid, because your kid already knows it, but explain that to me because I don't know what you mean by blah, blah, blah. Oh, and then you explain it a little bit. I say, oh, you mean SharePoint that's used to be called OneDrive or something like that. So when we think about collecting from our client, which is kind of our next topic, I wanted to show you a workflow that someone came up with that I was like, that's genius and has some risk. And what they were doing was they would travel to these places, bringing their hotspot, and they would go to see their custodians. And during the custodial interview, they would log on to the custodian's computer and start dragging and dropping stuff directly into the review platform. And so to kind of see what that would be like, that would be like, I'm showing up on site, I've started this case called Red Ruby versus Green Llama, and I'm going to my imports page here, and I'm on my custodian's computer, and I've got a little pre-organized here, so just bear with me here. And I can say, oh, okay, I've got new import, and on the left, I can just start dragging things and say, okay, I need this document, and then I want some more documents. I can just keep dragging things as I find them, and I'm going to go through it. I'm going to give I'm working right now with this guy named John Runnable, so I'm going to assign all these documents to John Runnable, and I might do some other things. But once I'm finished going through and looking at all this material, I can simply log in and hit start, and it'll upload the data from my client's computer directly into the review platform. And I was like, that sounds so terrible, but such a good idea. And he says, it makes sense because then I don't have to go back to the custodian. I've since talked to that gentleman out of New Orleans, and he says, I've modified it now. I don't even travel to custodian sites. I use screen sharing technology like GoToMeeting or Zoom, log into the computer and have them show me their email. We close their Outlook and we drag their entire OST up. We go find these things. I was like, that's a great idea. But I also said, don't forget your chain of custody documentation. Don't forget when you're doing that loading yourself, we have to actually go back and make sure that everything got loaded, everything got uploaded. Right here it says, but that job moved over to the complete process. And then when I can go into my platform, I haven't left my custodial's office yet. I can go into the platform and say, okay, did everything get uploaded? Everything get processed? I can go to my data imports and say, okay, here's round one. When I expand it, I say everything's complete. Everything's in this complete folder or in these regular purple exception folders, meaning I've got the data, I can leave and move on. I was like, that is an incredible workflow that I haven't seen a lot. But I also remind them, you also need to fill out a chain of custody document, which we've uploaded for you, which if you've never seen this, we're going to spend a lot of time on this in a few weeks on an ACES webinar. You know, a chain of custody document, the goal is to identify the source of the data so that later on we figure out where it is. And yes, indeed, in iConnect, when I did that workflow, it tracked the custodian. And if later on I go and, you know, I'm going to someone else's custodian, and I'll just demo this real quick, I got a few minutes, and let's just be hypothetical for a minute. I've got another custodian named, excuse me, and I'll drag that same document that we got the first time, that analysis. So I got this from another custodian, we'll call it the file server. And if I hit start on that, you know, I've got the same document again, but now another custodian's got it. It's going to process that, and it'll actually track the deduplication of the custodians. So it's kind of an interesting model that this person came up with. And it just, we're going to invent new workflows all the time. And I thought that was really creative. But custodian tracking chain of custody is something you can't forget. So I am reminded I'm supposed to do a poll question. And while we're doing that poll question, I'm going to answer several of the questions that came in. I won't necessarily go into demos, but I'm going to show out a poll here that'll help us kind of understand the rest of the webinar, whether we go super technical or super not. So the poll question is, how many e-discovery projects does your organization start per month? None, 1 or 2 or 3 to 7, or more than 7. So one of the questions that came in is, how do you deal with load files that are not the old DAT concordance way? And in reality, you can drag and drop CSVs, you can drag and drop just PDFs in, it'll process those. If you don't have a load file, you can also manufacture one. When you're dealing with some of those old legacy types like DIIs, you generally need to go back to whoever produced that and say, can you produce that in something modern? I mean, DIIs really haven't been useful for several years. But there's also an XML format that was popular for some time that's kind of died out. But in general, all of those can be converted to some kind of spreadsheet, CSV, or a DAT. Ian, do you ever get questions about load file types? I mean, I really don't see anything except for DAT, OPTs, LSTs, and things like that, which the system also supports.
I mean, I think, you know, some of the unique things that we have in the load file screen is that you can choose your delimiters. So if in fact you're not running a DAT with a quote common new line as a standard DAT, you have the ability to create your own. We've even had clients with multiple characters as the delimiter. They had sort of like a quote and a pipe or something was a delimiter, and we've actually built that as well. So we've got there's a lot of uniqueness to the load files we get. So because of that, there's a lot of flexibility in and around that importer. If you want to just click the DAT template and run it, great. The CSV template and run it, great. But if you got a weird one that has all kinds of, you know, pipes and carrots and all kinds of stuff in it, the system actually can deal with those too, because we know that stuff's out there, and we've gone and built a platform to make sure it has the flexibility to deal with those kind of things.
I'm going to close the poll out, and I am super happy to say that we only had a few people say none. Most everybody was in these outer categories out there. So we're going to kind of assume that everybody here is doing e-discovery, you know, 5 to 7 times a month, and they're kind of deep in that thick. But I'm also going to kind of keep it to where, hey, we're trying to build this workflow and understand what it is. And so my next set of discussion is highly controversial to some people and new to others. And this is kind of talking about, what do modern production requests look like? And I'm going to read the bullets a little bit, but then I'm going to go back to that document that I've given you guys, and we're going to walk through it a little bit so we understand exactly what's in there. And number one issue that we face is when, and don't yell at me, those of you that are out there, I see you, I know you're going to hit me in chat again, but it's when our legal professionals send out production requests to opposing parties that don't attach the standards or the request for the format. If you as litigation support, or even just paralegal or whatever you are, can't convince your attorneys when they're sending out production requests, please attach this document and reference it, you need to go beat that hammer harder, because they're just costing you and the end client money, because now you're having to interpret whatever garbage you get from the opposing party. And I think we could do a whole webinar, we would need alcohol with it, just talking about, here are the top, what I would say, 50 problems we get from opposing party load files. One would be the DII we already talked about, but all production requests should have this standard attached to them. We already kind of showed you, I won't show you that second bullet again, we already kind of showed you how when you get a production in, you can scan it. You know, the old way was you open it up in Excel or a spreadsheet document and you go and look and see what's in there. But the modern ones, you know, Ian still even does something better. It'll go through and say, oh, there's missing images, they're missing natives. Do you really want to load this incomplete load file, or do you want to go back and argue? It almost like writes, not a motion to compel, but it writes the response for you saying, here's all the issues. But there are a few key information points that need to be provided with that production. And whether it's in the cover letter or it's actually in the DAT file, understanding the custodian of the data you received helps you prepare for a deposition later. And if you get a certain type of load file, the one I'm suggesting, you're actually able to dedupe the inbound load file against the data you've already reviewed. You know, if you've marked something as hot document and the opposing party produces it back to you, you don't probably need to look at it again, therefore saving your client some time and money. And so we're able to dedupe a lot of that data as it comes in, so we know what's going on. That also lets us do something where we can automatically identify things that are missing. Hey, we produced these 10 emails that have their domain name in it, but they didn't bother to produce it back to us. So now we know their e-discovery process is either incomplete or they haven't given it to us, or now we can write our motion to compel saying, you know, give us this data. And then if you can't give us that data, we can go back and say, well, there might be some sanction or something about that. So that's one point, is when you get certain type of metadata, it's not there just because we're being irritating, it's there because we want it to help us. The other one that's extremely important that you miss almost all the time when you're getting just PDFs is the parent-child relationships. If an email has an attachment, we want to know. And what I think people forget about is emails have attachments sometimes, but also PowerPoints have attachments. A PowerPoint might have an embedded Excel document that has more information. So if you're talking about a list of employees that's listed in that PowerPoint, there's just some spreadsheet that shows the demographic. That entire Excel document may be embedded in that PowerPoint, including all those employees' social security numbers and things like that. And we'll show you in our next series of a webinar coming up in May about how we automatically identify some of that secret information or that hidden information out there. But there's information that you should get. So let's look at that production request real quick and go through it. And we'll hit the controversial part really early, I promise. And you have this, you can follow along if you can't see the screen there. Number one is where we're going to hit it. Produced electronic documents should be in their complete native / original format, incorporating names at the beginning Bates number. This is the debated topic. I want the opposing party to give me every document in native form all the time. But that is too new for a lot of people. And so most people are saying, I'm going to give you Bates stamp TIFFs, which is old legacy. But what I want really is I want multi-page searchable PDFs endorsed for the Bates on every page. If you're not going to give me the native, give me that searchable PDF so I know what I'm going to be able to go find. So when we're that's right off the bat. Everything else is pretty straightforward. There's a lot of language in here. If you want to have a meeting just with us to talk about these production requests and what they mean and what all these terms mean, I'd love to get together with you. We also have probably a recorded webinar that talks about it. But down here, you can even see that Ian's talking about, you know, the DAT file has particular characters for new line and quote characters. You know, it's not a CSV because guess what? Commas exist in email subjects, but it's very rare you see this, what we call the P character, which is a quote character in that. And it's very rare that you see the delimiter character that's between records or between rows. So when we look through this, it's very specific, but it's also very short. If I'm asking a lawyer to attach 5 pages to their production request, you know, that's not over the top. We even go as far as to explain and give examples of what things are. You know, on the right here, when you're looking at our metadata form, I say, here's what I'm expecting the data type to be. Here's where I think how big it's going to be. I'm not telling you because I don't want you to give me something bigger than that. I'm just telling you, if you have something bigger than that, you probably did something wrong. But on the right, I even give you examples of what those things look like. All the way down to our second page, we're talking about yes or no's. Some people ones or zeros, some people true or false. All of those things necessarily will fit. So that's kind of what we're talking about with production. But Ian, go ahead.
Yeah, so Gavin, what you're talking about there is some kind of plain Jane stuff. If somebody was looking for, if they knew they were going to be requesting phone data, or they knew they were going to be requesting Yammer and Slack, would you simply take that document and expand it out or add an addendum to cover off that as well?
Yeah, I would almost want that in native form again. And there's a whole other discussion we could have on these non-documentized type of data. You know, for instance, when you're looking at internet history, how do you take internet history and request that from an opposing party and put it in a review tool? We'll cover that in our webinar with Craig Ball coming up. But yeah, how do you convert those types down into something like a DAT file? And almost all of those types can be converted down. But what is a native file for a text message? There really is no such thing, because the text message is stored in a SQLite database, yada, yada, yada. We don't have to get nerdy, but you're right. You have to kind of pare that down, and you have to understand that we're using this as a starting point. And if someone asks the right question, we know they're actually caring about it.
Well, and it ties back into what you talked about earlier in the session, which is ask the questions of the custodians. Where's the data going to be? Where's the stuff I should be looking for? And then take that document, tweak it, or modify it in order to be in sync with the information that you already know.
Yeah, and the purpose of this slide is almost to introduce that. On that native file on the right, I just have many different file types, and we just don't know what you're going to give us. I mean, you might give us AutoCAD files. You might give us, you might give me a UFDR, which is a particular type of cell phone data. You might give me a UFED. You might give me all kinds of things that help me understand that. But the legacy production types out there, which is single page TIFF and JPEG, those of you that are on the phone here, CITT4 is a word that used to be used. And if someone's still requesting single page TIFF that's only black and white and color JPEGs, I would love to yell at that person for a while and say, why aren't you using a modern review tool? Why do you need this legacy format? Most modern review tools support anything. We can load that into iConnect, but I'd much rather have a multi-page PDF. And here's why. For all of you that are trying to save money, the multi-page PDF is the smallest actual file size of all those. And therefore, if you're paying per month per gig and you get single page TIFFs at 300 DPI, there's no compression in that. You're going to be paying a way more for storage than if you'd have just gotten a PDF, which has got Adobe Deflate generally as the compression. LZW, all these other fancy words. There's reasons that we ask for this stuff, not just if we're trying to be inconvenient. Similarly, if I'm going to send you a production electronically and I share it, if I give you multi-page PDF, it's going to be a smaller production format than if I gave you single page TIFF. It would be less for you to download. So there's reasons we do this. There's reasons we modernize, but there are a lot of legacy tools out there that just either A, are not being updated, or just don't ever necessarily want to update. So kind of our last topics, as we get out of here really is how do we use our documents? And Ian showed you how you review them, but what I want to talk about is how do we know that we can get this stuff to other people? And the old way was, and Ian even had this a long time ago, you used to send someone an email and attach a document. Now we can send messages in the system. That's kind of a given, we can do that. But when you're sharing with external parties, how do we actually get it to where we can get it to them so they can use it? I mean, the obvious answer that we'd all love to tell you is you give them a user and you let them log in and look at it, but they may not be, they may be an adversary, they may be a third-party witness, they may be someone else. The other reason we use documents, and I hate to tell you lawyers and legal professionals what you use them for, but you got motion practice, depositions, trial, all of these sometimes have slightly different uses or slightly different needs. When you go to mediation settlement, you might bring documents that are for the purpose of settlement that are not going to be allowed to be admitted at trial. And so you have a different Bates label or a different type or a different way of dealing with that. But in general, everything is going to be reduced to 8.5 by 11. Notice I didn't say paper, 8.5 by 11 with some kind of Bates label. And these different uses out there, and some of the modern ways that we're seeing that is, if I go back into my I'll go back in here and I'll show you that when I'm going to go get prepared for a deposition, one of the things I can do is I can say, okay, I need these documents right here and I want to download them right now. And so if I just simply click download, what some of the systems are doing is say, hey, some of these don't have images, they don't have the native cache, so it's going to take some time to download that. And you could imagine that I've got some documents that I'm ready to go right now, and this is telling me it's going to take 25 seconds to make the download package. So what this is going to do is go convert it and then let me have all those files so I can quickly go and use them. And I think that's also something that I've seen in legacy tools where getting data out of the system is hard, or you have to go through a vendor or lit support to get the data out. And in this case, we're showing you that there's ways that you can just go and actually download that data for whatever your purposes are, creating folders, doing whatever. And that's the automation that we're talking about. The system automatically knows, okay, I want to download this document as a PDF. I want you to look at this. When I open this zip file now, notice I've got 3 documents, but if you look in the background, there were actually 4. And it's just one of those documents that I uploaded. Remember, I talked about PowerPoints can have embedded objects, actually has an embedded item. So when I go in there, I got 3 PDFs. And if I open those PDFs, you'll see that they're, just right here. And we've actually gone through and named it for that review number. We haven't necessarily based it because we want to use it for this purpose. But if I go into my native directory, you'll now see that I have this weird file that I downloaded that if I, try to open it, it may not open because it may be in a text file or something else like that. So if we see what that looks like, let's see what's necessarily in that OLE. Can I drag out? I can't drag out. But that's kind of the idea of how do we get our data out? Can we make it easy to get it out? Did it pick the automatic or the right format for me? How am I going to get through that, that data out there? Now, we only have no time left, so I apologize. If you need to head out, please. But I wanted to spend just a few minutes here. This is my only marketing of the entire day, I promise. One of the advantages you have with Ian and iConnect System is the flexibility of the workflows, but there are some advantages when you're looking among all different vendors. And one of the things is we provide what we call the ideal workflow. And with some of these platforms out there, especially the Avansic Now platform we just launched, you can work on your own time. You can do a lot yourself. You don't have to call lit support to load data. You don't have to call lit support to download data. There's a lot of things that you can do for yourself. And the price is really affordable, and you can get through what you want to get through. Ian, any final thoughts here? That we're totally out of time. I apologize for going over, crowd.
No, my only other comment would be it's kind of interesting when we introduce a new feature to the platform. Sometimes the first question we get is, how do I turn that off? Because there are certain people within our organization that I'm just not comfortable giving them that level of access. And I think that's something to keep in mind, is that we've shown you a lot of stuff today, a lot of very cool things that you can turn on. All of those can be turned on or off, and you get to choose, as I talked about before, depending on the profiles of your user and your comfort level with exposing certain features to users. You can build profiles and access to features by user, give that user profile a name, and then apply that to a multitude of users. So you can not only build your own workflow within the tool, you can build your own workflow within your team to make sure that the appropriate people can get to the actions that are important to build efficiencies within your organization.
We Connect, brought to you by iConnect, making information accessible.